How's it going? So today we're going to look at the preview for episode 5 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. Okay, so first shot of the trailer, we have Alicent and Aemond at the Red Keep, and this is very, very reminiscent. It's like it's setting up here. It's very reminiscent of what Larys was warning Aegon about when he was trying to discourage him from leaving the capital and attending the war, which of course we know that he did in the last episode. But in episode 3, Larys makes the comment about how some people are whispering that, you know, they wanted Aegon to go to war so that in his absence, the Queen Alicent and Prince Aemond could rule in his stead. And it's almost as if they're setting up for that. It looks like Aemond has the dagger in his belt here. So I don't know, maybe we might see him actually read the thing like we were talking about in the last video. We see here that they are obviously back in the Red Keep, and the war strategy was for them to march on Harrenhal and reclaim the castle, which obviously they've had to turn back to King's Landing because the king's injuries were so severe that they had to be tended to immediately, and it really holds up the whole war machine and, you know, falters the Greens on their campaign. So again, we see this reinforcement of the theme of consequence for impulsivity, and, you know, now that they've been taken off course and they have to delay their planning to install this new hierarchy within the Red Keep to govern in the place of the king, who is clearly not going to be partaking in any small council scenes anytime soon. So we have this vacuum where Daemon is now being given the opportunity that he wouldn't have had otherwise to recruit banners and to rally men and to rebuild Harrenhal with this extra time and this extra grace that he's been given. So we see the speaker is saying, "Behold the traitor dragon Melis," and per Melis' head is being carted through the city of King's Landing, creating a spectacle for all the Smallfolk. You know, the visual parallels are completely undeniable from Jaehaerys' funeral, which was also a beheading. One being depicted as, oh, this innocent child and this villainous Rhaenyra the Cruel is responsible. And in this instance, it's the traitor dragon Melis and the victorious Aegon the Magnanimous who conquered her, who slayed her. And still to have these visual parallels, and for both to be just complete instances of propaganda, one to evoke sympathy and the other to, you know, rally the spirits of the small folk around the king. And they're trying to portray him as this really strong figure and Rhaenyra as this really cruel figure, but in both instances the accreditation for who is actually responsible for the murder is incorrect. You know, like obviously with Prince Jaehaerys it was blood and cheese, but they were sent by Daemon. And with Melis, you know, King Aegon was already long felled at this stage, and it was Aemond who obviously killed Melis with Vhagar. This kind of feels like Aemond, although in the first season he really wanted to make out as if he didn't really care about the credit for the deed, he just wanted like the power that came from it essentially. This might be something that he either instructs them to do, or else it might be something that he will feel slighted by because he was the one that was responsible for killing Melis, and he might feel that this is something that is similarly being unjustly taken from him. But what I think is notable in this scene particularly, where we actually see the close-up of Melis, is the distance that the crowd are keeping from this cart. In the case of Jaehaerys' funeral, they were almost climbing in the carriage, you know, like it was getting swarmed by the small folk. So the fact that they're keeping this distance does kind of almost depict like a disgust for the dragons and what they stand for. And the dragons are symbolic of their Targaryen dragon masters. So is this reflecting their relationship with the dragon lords? We might see that relationship dynamic change. So as the speaker says that the dragon is slain by King Aegon, we see this covered box be carted into the Red Keep. One of the first things I noticed was that none of these are Kingsguard, none of these are in their white cloaks. So where are they? But being carried on by these men, and all of the servant women here are all sitting with their head down, you know, either in respect or to pay some sort of, you know, dignity to him, that they're not looking to injure his ego in any further way than he has already clearly been severely injured. So obviously, because of the severity of his injuries, they want to keep this box hidden and enclosed, but also he is having to essentially be stretchered in on what literally looks like a coffin, because he is incapable of moving, because he can't walk, and he has been injured so severely that he is likely going to be out of action for, if not the rest of the season, the vast majority of it. And I imagine he's going to be bedbound for a whole lot of it, because despite the fact they left it quite ambiguous at the end of the last episode whether he and Sunfire were going to make it or not, I think they'll live to fight another day. I think that's safe to say. So obviously it's necessary for them to conceal his body and conceal how injured he is, because they want to portray him as this strong king who just went and slayed a dragon, not, you know, this severely injured man who's going to have to spend a lot of time recovering, because again, that's not going to bring a lot of hope to the Smallfolk, and it's definitely not going to bring a lot of lords to their side. Concealing his condition, concealing, you know, how he ended up in this condition, because obviously it was mostly his brother was responsible, and now his brother is presumably going to be taking on this role of leadership over the Smallfolk and over King's Landing and over these political negotiations with other lords. They're not going to want that coming out, and I don't know how they're going to play it, because obviously Aegon is going to be the one who was central in that whole scenario, and if his memory has not suffered after the fall, or from being dosed up on milk of the poppy after his injuries, then, you know, is he going to say something about the fact that it was Aemond that burned him? Or is it, you know, is it going to come out from one of the many, many knights who were fighting, and many, many men who were manning the weaponry on, you know, on the field? Because the entire time that they were on the field, we seen them watching the dragon fight. So, you know, it wouldn't make sense for this information not to come out. They all watched what happened, you know, like, and they not only watched the fact that Aemond burned his brother, the king, and sent him on his descent into the forest, but they also witnessed the fact that obviously Meleys wasn't slain by King Aegon. Meleys was slain by Vhagar and Aemond. So I don't know how far this propaganda can go, because there were so many witnesses. So I don't know how they're planning to keep a lid on that. We'll see. So something that's also notable about this whole situation of, you know, pageantry and propaganda, and the Hightower's recognition of the importance of constructing narratives, is the fact that they recognize the importance of the opinion of Smallfolk and, you know, the smaller lords who they are going to have to treaty with. And, you know, from Aegon's first installation as king, he was saying the Smallfolk are our key to victory. You know, our victory will be won from the efforts of the Smallfolk. Whereas, in contrast to this, Rhaenyra, from she was, you know, made the heir, she was kind of like, oh, well, I don't have to pay attention to the Smallfolk, like we've seen in season 1 episode 4, where they're going through Flea Bottom, and it was she and Daemon, and he's talking about, you know, takes her to the play, talks about the importance of winning over the hearts and minds of the Smallfolk, and she's like, I don't care if they don't like me, because their opinion doesn't matter to me, and he's like, no, it has to. And then of course she goes off to Dragonstone as soon as her children are born, because she can't really deal with a contestation about their parenthood. So there are all of these lines of division that she's drawn between herself and forming a relationship with the Smallfolk, whereas Aegon seemingly had a better relationship with the Smallfolk, even with the fact that he did what he did to the rat catchers. They all seemed relatively happy to see him still when he walked into the bar in the last episode. So yeah, so we see him getting put down in his bed chambers. So last time we seen this door was when he was walking out of there full of determination and full of drink to go and get Aegon the Conqueror's armor on and his beautiful dragon Sunfire and fly off into battle. Something that I think's interesting is in this trailer we don't get to see Aegon, And obviously that's because they're trying to conceal his condition to us as well as the viewer. And this begs the question, are they either going to do some sort of elaborate reveal of, oh, look how badly burned he is, and, you know, like try and shock the audience? Or are they going to, you know, mostly keep him off scene and try and build suspense about his condition, about his state for later on? Are they really going to try and like withdraw him because he's been such a central character for the last couple of episodes? It's going to be interesting to see, because obviously we don't see him at all in this trailer. We just get the indication that he is in this box, and that's about it. Alicent coming in asking, is he alive? The stage, we have maesters coming in to tend to his wounds, and this is very reminiscent of the scenes that we've seen of Viserys when he was in these bed chambers and he was ill and he was constantly getting tended to. And Alicent is probably going to be feeling a lot like she has spent her entire life looking at a man in her life ill in this bed and looking at the back of maesters' heads, and her having to tend to these men in all of her life, in every aspect of her life, at every stage of her life. And the only difference is it's changed from her husband to her son. And for the book fans, it was King Jaehaerys and then King Viserys and now King Aegon. And she has done nothing but toil and labour in the service of these men, as the Queen Who Never Was said in season 1. Obviously it's going to plague Alicent in this episode, especially this episode, because in the last one we seen her toiling over the fact that she had just learned that everything that was happening was the result of her having a misunderstanding and mistakenly thinking that Viserys was talking about her Aegon when he was talking about Aegon the Conqueror and his state of delirium before he passed, and then her usurping the throne, installing her son. And as soon as she finds this out from Rhaenyra that it was actually a misunderstanding, she spends the whole last episode looking through all the Targaryen histories that she can get her hands on to try and figure out if she can find any reference to the Prince Who Was Promised, to Aegon's dream, to this specific prophecy, and she's going through everything, trying to find some justification for what she's done, or trying to find some proof to Rhaenyra's claim. And, you know, obviously we see that she doesn't exactly find that, but she is she's completely despairing the whole episode. And, you know, it does kind of result in her sitting down with her son. She's kind of rolling her eyes. He's trying to open up to her about the fact that he feels undervalued and overlooked in his council. And she kind of lets off on him a bit and says some things to him that she probably needed to say for the past, you know, at least since he's been installed as king, but probably the past couple of years of his adulthood, to kind of whip him into shape. But realistically all she does is reinforce his feelings of inadequacy, and then it compels him even more to go out and try and prove himself by going and participating in this battle, and then ultimately getting really, really severely wounded. So now she's going to be feeling the crushing guilt of the fact that all of this is happening because of her misunderstanding and her then usurping the throne because of this. And then this crushing guilt of, you know, what happened to Prince Jaehaerys, and then her essentially fighting with her son and it being the catalyst for him flying off into battle and getting severely wounded. And now she's going to have to sit and look at her son and nurse him. And it's her firstborn son, and even though they have a very rocky relationship, it's understandable that she's going to feel some type of way about this. And then we get a scene of the Black Council and Rhaenyra saying we cannot challenge King's Landing without the Riverlands. So in this scene, I imagine this is not long after the news that they have lost Rhaenys, whose council was incredibly valued to Rhaenyra, and that they've also lost Meleys, so they are one dragon and one dragon rider down, and one important council member down. So I think we're really going to get, you know, within this planning scene, and especially the fact that they're talking about the importance of the Riverlands, and the fact that this is a lot higher stakes now because so much of the Crown lands has been won over by Kristen Cole in the situation of offering the king's justice. Essentially, you have no choice but to swear fealty to us, or else we're going to behead you all. Because they have lost so much footing in the Crown lands, it's really essential that they get the Riverlands on their side so they can push downwards towards King's Landing, because otherwise they really have no way to King's Landing where they're going to have support. And also the fact that the stakes are raised even further again by the loss of this dragon and the loss of this dragon rider. It's kind of symbolic too, because the death of Rhaenys almost comes like the death of peace. She no longer has anyone at her table that's trying to preach restraint in the way that Rhaenys was, and the way that Rhaenys was trying to push for dialogue. It's like with her accepting that she had to participate in battle, and with her dying in battle, Rhaenyra now recognises this is all out war. And we cut to this lovely scene with the lovely Caraxes, and Daemon's also there, and he says, "Our terms are simple. Bend the knee to me," which he stresses, "or your house burns." Looks very cool, calm, collected. He couldn't care less. He's sitting on top of a dragon and he's looking at this handful of men down here, this small bundle of men. So these are Bracken. These are the Bracken men, and we can tell this by their clothes and their heraldry. And in the last episode, when he was talking to the Blackwoods were kind of implying that they wanted the Brackens burned. But we see here that Daemon is offering them the chance to bend the knee simply because he needs the men, and he knows that these men are ready and willing to spill blood. So I don't know how this is going to go down with the Blackwoods. Might inevitably damage some relations if he's trying to get these houses that have been feuding since the Age of Heroes to try and work together in this civil war that's, not even necessarily anything to do with them. We'll see. You see these quite spectacular shots of Harrenhal being rebuilt, and it really does beg the question, how are they funding this? Because Larys made it very clear in that the Green Council scene where, Aemond or Aegon was chastising him for essentially Harrenhal falling to Daemon and so easily, and he was like, "Oh well, it doesn't matter because I hold the purse strings, so they will not have any funding, and the castle's in a state of disrepair. It's not going to be any use to them trying to raise an army." But clearly they have somehow got a whole lot of funding, a whole lot of wood. Hope we're not falling any weirwood forests anyway, I can say that much. The place is already rare enough, but they've constructed all these all this scaffolding around all the pillars. They're reinforcing everything, and you could potentially justify it and say, oh, they wouldn't need that much money for this because they could just fall in nearby forest and construct all this scaffolding. They could just enforce some sort of rule over all these men that are now under Daemon's rule, that they all essentially are being conscripted on as some builders in the castle, and they're being held under threat of dragonfire that they have to do it. But then it begs the question, if they're getting all this stone to finish everything, where are they getting this from? Because it's not like there's a quarry just in the garden, So what type of nefarious deeds is he getting up to? They facilitate paying for all this. Hopefully we get some sort of explanation for that, because they really did make a point of Larys saying that he is the one in control of the finances for Harrenhal. So we'll see. And while this plays a mysterious voice, and I couldn't really make this out. I know some people were saying it was Alice Rivers. I'm gonna fight for my girl. I don't think it was her. I seen somebody say that they think it might be Lena. Yeah, no, I'm not really sure. I'm not 100%, but the mysterious voice says, "Daemon, you were made to wear a crown." And again, it's trying to instigate the idea of this conflict between Daemon and Rhaenyra, and whether the black side is going to split into two different factions. That Daemon's going to go off and form this splinter claim to the throne, and that the viewer is supposed to be very mistrusting of his intentions, and whether he's swaying from trying to prove himself and get all of these Crownland and Riverlands houses to Rhaenyra's side, whether he's going to try and now make this claim for himself, which was again something that they really made an emphasis on in that scene where he's trying to get the Brackens to swear fealty. He says to swear to him, where they really strategically cut that out of all the other trailers that they showed, so I was very surprised when I first seen that. But again, they're trying to reinforce this idea. We have him sleeping, waking, so there's definitely going to be another dream sequence, you just know it. So then we get the shot of the Green Council and Otto Hightower saying the king does not lack for heirs. So I think what's notable in this is I was looking up the IMDb for the last episode and Otto was credited in it and obviously did not make an appearance, so I think that might have been an error and actually it meant that he was going to be in this episode. So we're going to just have to pay some real good close attention to that. But yeah, we have this small council scene and it's noticeable that every single one of them is sitting. Obviously Aegon's seat is empty, and you know, usually where it's shot up facing towards this seat and facing Aegon, and this being the head of the table, this like inverted camera work is now making it so that Aemond is up at the head of the table and the head of the table is at the opposite side. And obviously again setting up this whole idea that he is going to be taking over some form of leadership. And like we said in the breakdown of the last episode, he was acting upon the knowledge in the last episode that he is essentially the heir because Jaehaerys is dead, and Jaehaerys will not be named heir, obviously, because they're going through, you know, the male lineage, the male succession. So he was essentially acting on this, knowing if I can get him out of the picture, I will be king. This is the only seat that's available, the actual head of the table, and every other seat is taken here. And Alicent is standing, and it's really setting this visual storytelling that there is no seat for her at this table, both literally and metaphorically. She is really being pushed out of the picture now. You know, like she said, there was sort of a place for her because her son Aegon was still malleable, if only in private. But now it's just going to be taken over by Aemond, I think. I think that's the only difference in what Laris was saying. I don't think it's going to be Aemond and Alicent taking over. I think it's going to be Aemond and Cole. So this is Aemond, and he is placing the king's wee marble ball in this placemat, you know, the establishing that the council is in session, and he places it very firmly down and with purpose, unlike his brother Aegon, who infamously just sits and plays with this thing through every single council scene. God love a boy, he does not have the attention span to be there. And while this is happening on screen, Alicent says, "So you cast me aside?" and is looking at Cole. And again, it's just reinforcing the fact that there's a lot of conflict going on between their, you know, interpersonal relations. And given the fact that in the last episode she was taking Minty and holding her stomach as if she was pregnant with this child, I'm sure she feels a lot of complicated emotions towards him right now. He states, in a different scene of course, "We have given the war to the dragons." He was really at the forefront of all this war planning and seemed like a very confident leader until it got to being on the battlefield when there were actual dragons warring above them and it was complete carnage, and all of a sudden it really didn't matter what the armies of men were doing, because I mean it paled in comparison to what a dragon could do with one claw. I think he very much recognised that when he got knocked out and then came to and had to basically crawl on his hands and knees through mud and ash and blood to get to his king, and then seeing his king, you know, essentially in a pit of molten armour and completely wounded to almost beyond repair. I think there's going to be a lot of character progression in this next episode for him, I would hope and like to imagine, because how could you come out of that situation and be unchanged? And I think that's kind of what this quote is meant to be illustrating, is the fact that there is almost this sense of just hopelessness now because they finally recognise the scale of devastation that comes from a war between dragons. Then it cuts to this scene of Jace and Vermax, and they're at the twins. I think it's supposed to illustrate this double meaning that yes, we've given the war over to the dragons, the actual animal themselves, but also we have given the war over to the young dragons So the next couple of scenes that we're going to see are kind of intercut between Jace and Aemond, and it's Jace out, politicking, and again, he really would rather be going and, getting his debt in blood rather than having to go and, treat with all these lords. He's treating with the phrase of the twins at the minute in this scene. But again, like Rhaenyra was saying, trying to establish some sort of hold in the Riverlands. So I think from this point on in, we're really going to see that the power dynamics are kind of spiraling out of the hands of the older generation who initially started all this, and it's really going to start being affected by the impulses of the young dragon riders. Given the fact what we just seen in the last episode, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of the young dragon lords not being able to control their emotions and trying to take over, and feeling that they are trying to prove themselves and feeling that they are capable of doing all this. But really, we're probably going to see that they're going to learn a lot of really hard lessons, and that they're going to be humbled very quickly when they see the devastation of a war between dragons. Yeah, like I was saying here, we have shots of Aemond then straight afterwards. He's looking up the Iron Throne. It's being lit by lightning. It's very reminiscent to the scenes of Daemon when he was having the dream of, the dream in the last episode, where he was walking into the throne room and he went up and it was young Rhaenyra, and then he ends up beheading the one who stands between him and the throne. And, very much reflective of this violence that Aemond imparted upon his brother who stands between him and the throne. And while we see this, Mysaria says, "The people whispered, when Viserys lived, there was peace." And I think this figure here in the hood who is running through this area of King's Landing, I think this is a clip from like the same series of clips that we seen in the Weeks Ahead trailer where Rhaenyra's handmaiden is in King's Landing, and not exactly sure why she's there, but I do theorize that she, given the fact that Mysaria is speaking over this exact piece and she's speaking about the Smallfolk in King's Landing while we're being shown this shot, I think that Rhaenyra's handmaiden is going to be one of Mysaria's new spies in her new spy network that she has to re-establish because Larys essentially rooted out her last, and she, now that she has a spot on Rhaenyra's council, she essentially needs to make herself an asset to stay there. I think that she is now going to kind of become this figure and confidant and advisor to Rhaenyra that Rhaenys was, and this like strong female companion when Rhaenyra is being faced by these rooms of men who are trying to, push her into making these decisions that she doesn't necessarily want to do. I think Mysaria is going to be a great assistant and giver of an alternative for some of these situations, or a lot of these alternatives are going to come in the ways of alternative ways of waging war, which is what she says in this trailer, that there are alternative ways of waging war, and that it doesn't all need to be as brutal as going out in the battlefield, that there are ways, and she knows how to tap into the small folk, and that is somewhere that Rhaenyra has always lacked in. And so by having these connections with the small folk, and I think her handmaiden is going to become very integral in instigating whatever she is talking about. So obviously Rhaenyra here, the path I walk has never been trod. So she is starting to build this rapport as well, and this comfort and this confidence with Mysaria that she doesn't have with other members of her council. And then we have Daemon getting his hands dirty doing some work in Harrenhal. It seems like they have progressed a lot since the last episode, so we're gonna need to see how that happened. We're gonna have to see a lot of people in Harrenhal to justify the fact that all this is sprung up in one episode. But yeah, as I was saying here, Mysaria, there's more than one way to fight a war, and then all of a sudden we see a closed gate with a number of Smallfolk crowding up at it. Someone reaching out here. These people all looking very distressed and displeased, to say the least. So maybe Rhaenyra's handmaiden was going into the city to instigate something on behalf of Miss Arya. We don't know. Yeah, looks like a bit of a riotous scene, if I do not say so myself. Yeah, so this was an interesting shot, I thought. So we have a very, very brief shot there of two or three men on horseback riding through a very misty looking woods. And I was wondering what this could be, if this could be the old men of the north coming down to give assistance, maybe meet Jace of the twins. Not sure, but an interesting shot, very, very short, very brief. And then who is this walking down so briskly after Rhaenyra? Her Queen's Guard does not seem very concerned, so I imagine it is either Jace or maybe Corlys, but definitely somebody that is known to be on her side, given the fact that her Queen's Guard did not react or stop them from any advancing towards her, which they're absolutely doing with a swagger. Yeah, so turn your back on Caraxes, not the best idea. Seems like the actions of someone that doesn't mind burning. And then that final shot there is of the painted table in Dragonstone. We have Rook's Rest here, and then them knocking that over, because obviously that was not in any way, shape or form a victory for their side, and the Stauntons were essentially wiped out in that interaction. So Rook's Rest was well and truly lost for them, so they're going to be trying to recoup their losses now at this stage. And final quote, "What we must do now is terrible." And we get these closing shots with Daemon looking very ominous in the halls of Harrenhal, but anything would look ominous in them halls. We have Alicent giving a real deep sigh. I wonder where she's sitting. Seat's very interesting. But yeah, she looks like she's contemplating a lot, like the weight of the world's on her shoulders. But God, they're beautiful shoulders, aren't they? And then Rhaenyra looking up, and again looking quite devastated. Obviously she just found out about the death of Rhaenys, and Rhaenys was her aunt, a trusted advisor, and a lot of the times in recent weeks has been the only person on her side. So now she's probably feeling very lost and alone, even though she is the queen who they're supposed to be fighting for in the first place. And that is the closing scene. So there we go. Very interesting. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Obviously it's gonna be a lot of outfall from the last episode. We're gonna be seeing reactions from the Black Council to Rhaenys' death. We're gonna be seeing a lot of Alicent kind of lamenting over the fact of what happened to Aegon and the fact that she feels somewhat responsible for it. We're going to be seeing Aemond trying to step himself into the king's boots in his absence, and Cole trying to reckon with the fact that he's been out here strategizing and war planning, and then he actually seen the devastation that was the result of that, and he really thought this was this genius plan that he was so prepared to carry out, but then once it actually came down to it, he was completely overwhelmed. And even though it was somewhat a success, when you look at how mangled the king and his dragon are, and the fact that they only have one dragon that's almost rideable, one that Helena does not ride, and then Aemond's dragon, who is a much older dragon but the biggest in the realm, they essentially just have one usable dragon at the minute now, because Sunfire is being taken out, and one dragon rider. So it's questionable of how much of a one it actually was in the grand scheme of the war. But we're going to be seeing a whole lot of lamenting from both sides, and then we're going to be seeing Daemon and Harrenhal probably having visions, probably barking at people to get this building done a bit quicker. and threatening to burn people. So real Targaryen nonsense. So yeah, I reckon it's going to be a good one. And I look forward to checking in with you all on Monday for the review. And a wee bit of analysis, of course. Also, everybody who has been subscribing and leaving comments, and anybody who's even just been viewing, everyone's been so sweet and lovely, and I really appreciate it. And I've been having some wonderful conversations in the comment section, so long may they continue. If you have anything you want to throw in there, any comments, any theories, I would love to read them. So I will see you in a couple of days.